The Last Hope. Ambassador Zara stood before the towering crystal screens of the Galactic Council chamber, her silver skin reflecting the cold blue light that filled the vast space. Around her, representatives from dozens of powerful alien civilizations sat in their floating seats, their faces showing everything from boredom to outright annoyance. She had been speaking for nearly an hour, her voice growing more desperate with each passing moment. Honored representatives, Zara began again, her forearms gesturing toward the holographic images floating above the council floor. The images showed her home world of Cathera Prime burning. Cities that had stood for thousands of years lay in ruins. Ships filled with civilians fled through space, only to be destroyed by the massive war vessels of the Dominion Empire. My people are dying. In less than 72 hours, our entire civilization will cease to exist. The Catharians had always been known throughout the galaxy as peaceful beings. Their technology focused on healing, art, and exploration rather than weapons of war. They had shared their medical knowledge freely with other species. Their music had brought joy to countless worlds, and their philosophers had helped solve disputes between warring factions for centuries. Now their very kindness had made them targets. The Dominion Empire had arrived without warning 3 days ago. Their massive black ships blotted out the sun above Cathera Prime, and their ultimatum was simple: surrender all resources and become slaves, or face complete extinction. The Catharians, having no military to speak of, had no choice but to flee and call for help. The Dominion has made their intentions clear, Zara continued, her voice breaking slightly. They do not want prisoners or workers. They want our world empty so they can strip it of its resources. Every man, woman, and child on Cathera Prime will die unless someone helps us. The representative from the Altarian Federation, a tall being with crystalline skin, finally spoke. Ambassador Zara, we sympathize with your plight, but the Dominion Empire commands a fleet of over 2,000 warships. Any species that opposes them risks their own destruction. The Meridian Collective Speaker, a creature that looked like living liquid metal, added, our analysis shows that military intervention would result in a 97% probability of failure. We cannot risk our own populations for such unlikely odds. One by one, the most powerful civilizations in the galaxy offered the same response. The Draconian Union cited their neutrality pacts. The Silicon Brotherhood claimed their ships were needed elsewhere. The Ethereal Consortium simply stated that evolution favored the strong, and perhaps the Catharians were meant to perish. As the final representative declined to help, Zara felt her hope dying. She had traveled across the galaxy, using up precious time her people didn't have, only to find that when it truly mattered, the great civilizations of the stars cared only for themselves. An unexpected answer. Light years away from the Galactic Council chamber, Captain Sarah Chen sat in the command center of Earth Defense Headquarters, staring at the same images that Zara had shown to the Council. The distress signal had reached Earth's monitoring stations 6 hours ago, and Sarah had been watching the situation develop with growing anger. Earth was barely a footnote in galactic politics. Humanity had only achieved faster-than-light travel 50 years ago, and their total fleet consisted of just 43 ships. Compared to the thousands of vessels commanded by the major powers, Earth was essentially powerless. Most alien species viewed humans as primitive newcomers who had nothing meaningful to contribute to galactic affairs. Captain, said Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison, Sarah's second-in-command, we're receiving updates from the Cathera system. The Dominion has begun orbital bombardment of the civilian evacuation sites. They're not even pretending to spare non-combatants. Sarah closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She thought about her daughter back on Earth, safe in her school, laughing with her friends. She thought about all the human children who would never have that chance if the Dominion decided Earth was next. But more than that, she thought about the Catharian children who were dying right now while the galaxy's most powerful civilizations debated profit margins and risk assessments. Get me the Secretary General, Sarah said quietly. Sarah, came the voice of Maria Santos, Earth's leader, over the secure channel. I've been watching the same feeds you have. It's horrible, but what can we possibly do? Our entire fleet wouldn't last 5 minutes against the Dominion. Maybe not, Sarah replied, but we can try. Secretary General, The Catharians helped us when we were developing our medical technology. Thousands of human lives were saved because they shared their knowledge freely. They didn't ask for payment or political favors. They helped because it was right. There was a long pause. Sarah, if we intervene, we might be signing humanity's death warrant. And if we don't, Sarah said, we're proving that we're no better than the species that call themselves civilized but let genocide happen when it's inconvenient to stop it. The decision that changed everything. Within 2 hours, Sarah Chen found herself standing before the emergency session of Earth's Global Defense Council. Representatives from every major nation on Earth filled the chamber, their faces grave as they watched the ongoing destruction of Cathara Prime on the main screens. The situation is this, Sarah began, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to propose. The Catharians have been abandoned by every major power in the galaxy. They have perhaps 18 hours before their civilization is completely destroyed. We are their last hope. The representative from the European Federation spoke first. Captain Chen, with all due respect, what you're suggesting is suicide. We have 43 ships against a fleet of over 2,000. The mathematics alone. The mathematics of morality are different, interrupted Dr. Robert Kim, Earth's senior xenobiologist. I've worked with Catharian scientists for over a decade. They're not just allies, they're friends. They've shared technology that has eliminated diseases, improved our agriculture, and advanced our understanding of the universe. While other species treated us like primitive children, the Catharians treated us as equals. Admiral Patricia Washington, Earth's highest-ranking military officer, stood to address the council. I've run every simulation I can think of. In direct confrontation, we lose every time. But warfare isn't just about firepower. It's about strategy, surprise, and sometimes just having the courage to do what others won't. The debate continued for hours, but as reports came in of more Catharian cities being destroyed, the discussion took on new urgency. Finally, Secretary General Santos called for a vote. All those in favor of authorizing military intervention to defend Cathara Prime. One by one, hands rose around the chamber. It wasn't unanimous, but it was enough. Earth would go to war. The fleet assembles. Captain Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the ESS Defiance, Earth's newest and most advanced starship, watching as the rest of humanity's fleet assembled around them. 43 ships of various sizes and capabilities, from massive battle cruisers to nimble fighters. It was the entire military might of the human species, and it looked pathetically small against the backdrop of space. All ships report ready, Captain, announced Lieutenant Commander Morrison. We have volunteers from the Merchant Marine, the Exploration Corps, and even some civilian vessels that insisted on joining us. Sarah nodded, looking at the faces of her crew. Most of them were young, barely out of the academy. They knew the odds as well as she did, but their eyes showed determination rather than fear. Captain, came a voice from the communication station. We're receiving a transmission from Ambassador Zara. The main screen flickered to life, showing the Catharian ambassador's exhausted face. Behind her, Sarah could see the smoke and flames of her dying world. Captain Chen, Zara said, her voice barely above a whisper, is it true? Are you really coming to help us? Yes, Ambassador, Sarah replied. Earth stands with Cathara. Tears began to flow down Zara's silver cheeks. But why? Your species has so little to gain and everything to lose. The other species, with all their power and technology, that said it was impossible. Sarah thought about her answer for a moment. Ambassador, there's an old human saying, the only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. We may not have the biggest ships or the most advanced weapons, but we know the difference between right and wrong. As the transmission ended, Sarah turned to her crew. I know what you're all thinking. We're about to face impossible odds. The entire galaxy expects us to fail. Maybe they're right, but sometimes the most important battles aren't the ones you're guaranteed to win. They're the ones you fight, because not fighting would mean losing everything that makes you who you are. She paused, looking out at the stars ahead of them. Today, we're not just fighting for Cathara Prime. We're fighting for the idea that a civilization's worth isn't measured by its military power, but by its willingness to stand up for what's right. We're fighting to prove that humanity belongs among the stars, not because we're the strongest, but because we care about more than just ourselves. The jump to destiny. The journey to Kythera Prime would take 6 hours at maximum hyperspace speed. As the human fleet prepared to jump, news of their decision began to spread throughout the galaxy. Most species reacted with disbelief. Some called it heroic foolishness. Others predicted it would result in humanity's extinction. On the bridge of the Defiance, Sarah received updates from her other captains. Every ship reported ready, despite the fact that many were hastily retrofitted civilian vessels. The cargo ship Prosperity had been converted to carry medical supplies and refugee evacuation pods. The exploration vessel New Horizon now bristled with weapons donated by Earth's various military forces. "Captain," Lieutenant Commander Morrison said quietly, "there's been a development. We're detecting several ships following us. They're not broadcasting identification signals." Sarah frowned. "Dominion scouts?" "Native, Captain. The energy signatures, they're from various species. Small groups, not official fleets." As they prepared to jump to hyperspace, Sarah realized what was happening. While the major governments had refused to help, individual captains and small groups from across the galaxy were quietly joining the human fleet. A few ships from the Altarian Federation, a squadron of independent Meridian vessels, even some ships from species Earth had never encountered before. "It seems," Sarah said with a slight smile, "that we're not as alone as we thought." As the human fleet jumped to hyperspace, carrying with it the hopes of a dying world and the dreams of species who still believed in doing what was right, the galaxy watched and waited. The next few hours would determine not just the fate of the Kytherians, but the future of moral courage among the stars. The battle for Kythera Prime was about to begin, and with it, the birth of something the galaxy had never seen before. An alliance built not on power or profit, but on the simple idea that all life was worth protecting. The arrival. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kythera system, and the sight that greeted them was worse than anything they had imagined. The once beautiful blue-green world of Kythera Prime was shrouded in smoke and fire. Massive Dominion warships, each one larger than Earth's biggest battlecruiser, hung in orbit like vultures circling their prey. Debris from destroyed Kytherian ships drifted through space, silent testimony to the desperate resistance that had already been crushed. Captain Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the Defiance, her hands gripping the command rail as she watched the tactical display. The numbers were even worse than their intelligence had suggested. Over 3,000 Dominion vessels of various sizes filled the system, from massive dreadnoughts to swarms of fighter craft. Against this overwhelming force, the human fleet of 43 ships looked like insects challenging a storm. "Captain," reported Lieutenant Commander Morrison, "we're detecting massive energy signatures from the planet's surface. They're not just bombing military targets anymore. They're systematically destroying every city, every town, every sign of Kytherian civilization." Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, thinking of the families hiding in shelters far below, counting down their final hours. When she opened them again, her expression was steel. "All ships, this is Captain Chen. We knew what we were getting into when we left Earth. The enemy has superior numbers and firepower, but they don't have what we have." "And what's that, Captain?" came the voice of Captain Rodriguez from the merchant vessel turned warship Prosperity. "They don't have anything worth dying for," Sarah replied. "Today, we show the galaxy what humans are made of. All ships, implement battle plan Shepherd. The Shepherd's Gambit." Commander Marcus Rivera had spent his entire career planning for battles that Earth's military experts said could never be won. As the commander of Earth's Special Operations Fleet, he had studied every historical example of small forces defeating larger ones. Now, as he led a squadron of 12 fast attack ships toward the Dominion fleet, he was about to put theory into practice. The Shepherd plan was elegantly simple. While the main human fleet engaged the Dominion forces in direct combat, Rivera's fast ships would use their superior maneuverability to punch through enemy lines and begin evacuating civilians from the planet's surface. It was dangerous, arguably suicidal, but it was also the only way to save any Kytherian lives. Remember, Rivera transmitted to the squadron, "We're not here to destroy the enemy fleet. We're here to save lives." Every civilian transport we get off that planet is a victory. The Dominion fleet had barely begun to react to the human arrival when Rivera's ships screamed past their forward positions at maximum speed. The enemy had expected the humans to engage in traditional formation combat, not this wild charge toward the planet. By the time the Dominion commanders realized what was happening, Rivera's squadron was already entering Cathera Prime's atmosphere. The planet's surface was a nightmare of destruction. Cities that had stood for millennia were burning ruins, but Rivera's sensors detected something the Dominion had missed. Massive underground shelters where hundreds of thousands of Catherians were still alive, waiting for a rescue that no one expected to come. "Bet a squadron with me," Rivera ordered. "We're going to the capital shelter complex. Alpha Squadron, take the Northern Industrial Zone. Remember, we load them fast and get out faster." As Rivera's ship, the Thunderbolt, touched down near the first shelter, he saw them. Catherian families emerging from hidden bunkers, their silver skin marked with soot and fear, but their large eyes filled with hope when they saw the human rescue ships. Children clung to their parents as human Marines helped them board the evacuation transports. "Commander," came a voice from his communications officer, "Ambassador Zara is in this shelter. She's refusing to leave until her people are safe." Rivera found the Catherian ambassador organizing the evacuation with the efficiency of a military commander. Despite the chaos around her, she remained calm, ensuring that the elderly and injured were loaded first. "Ambassador," Rivera said, "my ship has room for 50 more. You need to be on it." Zara shook her head. "I appreciate your bravery, Commander, but I cannot leave while my people suffer. Tell me, how is the battle going?" Rivera looked at his tactical display. The space battle was not going well. The human fleet was fighting with desperate courage, but they were being systematically overwhelmed. "We're holding our own," he lied. Zara studied his face and seemed to understand. "Your people are dying for us. Why would you do such a thing?" "Because," Rivera said as he helped a Catherian child into the transport, "that's what humans do. We protect those who can't protect themselves." The science of hope. Aboard the human research vessel New Horizon, Dr. Elena Vasquez worked frantically with a team of Catherian scientists who had been rescued from a bombed university. The ship's laboratory had been hastily converted into a joint research facility, where human and Catherian minds worked together to find any advantage against the Dominion fleet. "The energy shielding on their ships," explained Dr. Thiss, an elderly Catherian physicist, "it operates on a rotating frequency pattern. We've been studying it for 3 days, but we lack the computational power to break the encryption." Dr. Vasquez smiled grimly. "Computational power we have. A limit to all ships. I need every computer core in the fleet linked to the New Horizon. We're going to crack their shield codes." Within minutes, the processing power of the entire human fleet was focused on the Dominion shield frequencies. Human quantum computers worked alongside Catherian crystalline processors, creating a hybrid system more powerful than either species could achieve alone. "There," shouted Dr. Thiss after 2 hours of intensive calculation. "The pattern repeats every 47 seconds. If we can time our attacks to coincide with the frequency shift, their shields will be vulnerable for exactly 2 seconds. Dr. Vasquez finished. "Elena to Captain Chen, we found their weakness." On the bridge of the Defiance, Sarah Chen felt a surge of hope for the first time since the battle began. Around her, the human fleet was being steadily worn down by the superior Dominion forces. They had lost 6 ships, and several others were badly damaged. But now they had a chance. "All ships," Sarah transmitted, "Dr. Vasquez has found a way to penetrate their shields. We get one shot at this. Wait for my signal, then concentrate all fire on their command ship." The timing had to be perfect. As the shield frequency reached its rotation point, Sarah gave the command, "All ships, fire." The combined firepower of the remaining human fleet focused on the massive Dominion command dreadnought. For 2 seconds, its shields were down, and every human weapon found its mark. The great ship, previously untouchable, erupted in explosions as its armor was breached. The effect on the Dominion fleet was immediate. Their formations wavered as ship commanders tried to understand how their supposedly invulnerable shields had been penetrated. In that moment of confusion, the human fleet pressed their advantage. The galaxy watches. News of the battle was spreading across the galaxy at light speed. On worlds belonging to dozens of different species, beings gathered around communication screens to watch something unprecedented. A tiny, primitive fleet standing against impossible odds to defend strangers. On the crystalline cities of Altaria Prime, citizens demanded to know why their government had refused to help. In the floating cities of the Meridian Collective, debates raged about the meaning of courage and moral obligation. Even on worlds that had never heard of either humans or Catharians, the story was spreading. Captain Vex of the independent Altarian cruiser Starfire had been following the human fleet since they left Earth space. Now, as he watched human ships being destroyed while they continued to fight for people they barely knew, he made a decision that would echo across the galaxy. "This is Captain Vex to all Altarian ships in the region." He transmitted on emergency frequencies. "I don't care what our government says. We're going to help them." One by one, ships from across the galaxy began jumping into the Cathara system. Not official fleets, but individual captains and small groups who had been inspired by human courage. A squadron of Draconian fighters. A wing of Silicon Brotherhood cruisers. Even ships from species so distant that humans had never encountered them. As these reinforcements arrived, the tide of battle began to shift. The Dominion fleet, which had been systematically destroying the human ships, suddenly found themselves facing attacks from multiple directions by species they had never expected to see working together. The underground network. While the space battle raged overhead, Commander Rivera had discovered something remarkable on Cathara Prime's surface. The Catharians had built an extensive underground network connecting all their major cities. What the Dominion thought was a conquered world was actually a hidden civilization, very much alive and now fighting back. "Commander," reported Sergeant Lopez, one of Rivera's Marines, "the Catharians have weapons down here. Nothing like what the Dominion has, but they've been organizing a resistance." Rivera met with the resistance leaders in a vast underground chamber that served as their command center. Hundreds of Catharians worked at communication stations, coordinating with survivors across the planet. At the center of it all was an elderly Catharian named Elder Koss, who had been organizing the resistance since the invasion began. "Commander Rivera," Elder Koss said, his voice carrying the weight of centuries, "your people have given us something we had lost, hope. But we cannot let you fight this battle alone. We know this world better than the Dominion ever will." Working together, human Marines and Catharian resistance fighters began launching coordinated strikes against Dominion ground forces. The humans provided tactical expertise and heavy weapons, while the Catharians used their knowledge of the underground tunnels to strike where the enemy least expected it. "It's working," Rivera reported to Captain Chen. "The Dominion forces are being tied down on the surface. They can't concentrate all their firepower on your fleet." The turning point. As the battle entered its 8th hour, both sides were exhausted. The human fleet had been reduced to 31 ships, many of them badly damaged, but the Dominion fleet had also taken heavy losses, particularly after more alien ships arrived to help the humans. On the bridge of the Defiance, Captain Sarah Chen watched as the tactical situation continued to evolve. The shield frequency discovery had allowed them to destroy several more Dominion ships, but the enemy was adapting, changing their shield patterns to prevent further exploitation. "Captain," Lieutenant Commander Morrison reported, "we're receiving a priority transmission from Admiral Patterson at Earth Defense Command." The main screen activated, showing Admiral Patricia Washington, Earth's senior military commander. Behind her, Sarah could see the busy activity of Earth's war room. "Sarah," Admiral Washington said, "I want you to know that Earth is proud of what you've accomplished. You've saved over 200,000 Catharian civilians and shown the galaxy what humanity stands for. But I also want you to know that you're not alone anymore. Unity forged in fire, the final stand." The dawn of the 4th day brought with it the largest space battle in recorded galactic history. Above Cathara Prime, nearly 400 ships from dozens of different species faced off against the remnants of the Dominion fleet. What had begun as a desperate rescue mission by 43 human ships had evolved into something unprecedented. a spontaneous alliance of species united by a shared sense of justice. Lieutenant James Park stood on the bridge of the human destroyer Vigilance, watching the tactical display with a mixture of awe and determination. The young officer had graduated from Earth Naval Academy just 6 months ago, and his first assignment had thrust him into the most important battle of his generation. "Lieutenant," called Captain Maria Santos from the command chair, "take us in close to the Dominion flagship. We're going to give the heavy ships a clear shot at their engines." James nodded, his hands steady on the navigation controls despite the chaos surrounding them. The Vigilance was one of the smallest ships in the human fleet, but what it lacked in firepower, it made up for in speed and maneuverability. As they approached the massive Dominion dreadnought, enemy fire filled space around them like deadly fireworks. "All ships, this is Admiral Washington aboard the Earth flagship Liberty," came the voice of Earth's senior commander over the communication channels. "Final assault begins now. Remember, we're not just fighting for Cathara Prime anymore. We're fighting for every small civilization that has ever faced extinction at the hands of bullies." The combined fleet moved forward in perfect coordination. Human ships worked alongside Altarian cruisers, while Meridian vessels provided cover for Draconian fighters. Species that had never fought together before operated as if they had trained together for years, united by a common purpose that transcended their differences: the price of courage. As the Vigilance raced toward the enemy flagship, James Park thought about the message he had recorded for his family back on Earth the night before. He had tried to explain why this battle mattered, why humanity had chosen to risk everything for people they barely knew. Sometimes, he had said to the camera, you face a moment that defines not just who you are, but who you choose to become. The galaxy is watching us, and we're showing them that there's another way to live among the stars. The Dominion flagship, a monstrous vessel called the Dominator, bristled with weapons that could destroy a city with a single shot. As the Vigilance approached, enemy fire intensified, and James watched several Allied ships disappear in brilliant explosions. Each loss represented hundreds of lives, beings who had chosen to stand up for what was right. "Lieutenant Park," Captain Santos called out, "their point defense systems are targeting us specifically. They know we're trying to get close." James studied his sensors and noticed something. The enemy fire was following a pattern, concentrating on the most direct approach routes. But there was a gap in their coverage, a blind spot created by the flagship's own massive weapons arrays. "Captain, I have an idea," James said. "It's dangerous, but it might work." "Let's hear it, Lieutenant." "If we approach from below their main gun batteries, we can use their own weapons as cover. They won't be able to target us without risking damage to their own systems." Captain Santos smiled grimly. "Do it." The Vigilance dove beneath the massive Dominion flagship, racing along its armored hull while enemy weapons fired over their heads. James had never flown so close to an enemy vessel, and the experience was both terrifying and exhilarating. Through the viewports, he could see the details of the enemy ship's construction, the alien writing on its hull, the glow of its massive engines. "Target acquired," reported the weapons officer. "We have a clear shot at their engine control systems." "Fire all weapons," Captain Santos ordered. The Vigilance's missiles and energy beams struck the enemy flagship's most vulnerable point. Explosions rippled along the great ship's hull as its engines began to fail. But their victory came at a cost. The Dominator's death throes included a massive explosion that caught the Vigilance in its shockwave. "Hull breach on decks 3 and 4, reported the damage control officer. "We're losing atmosphere fast." James looked at his control panel and saw that the ship's navigation systems were failing. Without engine control, they were drifting helplessly toward the planet's atmosphere. In minutes, they would begin an uncontrolled descent that would destroy the ship and everyone aboard. "Captain," James said quietly, "I can get us clear, but someone needs to stay at the navigation station to maintain manual control. The radiation levels, whoever stays won't survive long." Captain Santos started to move toward the navigation station, but James was already there. "Lieutenant, that's an order." "With respect, Captain," James said as he locked the navigation controls to manual, "you're needed to command the ship. I'm just the pilot." As the Vigilance slowly turned away from the planet using James's manual control, The radiation from the damaged engines began to flood the navigation station. James felt his strength fading, but he held his position, guiding the ship toward the safety of the Allied fleet. "James," Captain Santos said, her voice breaking, "we're clear. You can leave the station now." But Lieutenant James Park had already collapsed over his controls, his sacrifice ensuring that his shipmates would survive to see the victory he had helped achieve. The galaxy united. Word of Lieutenant Park's sacrifice spread through the Allied fleet within minutes, then across the galaxy within hours. On worlds throughout known space, beings of dozens of different species heard the story of a young human who had given his life not for conquest or glory, but to save his friends and protect people he had never met. The effect was immediate and profound. Ships that had been hesitating at the edges of star systems began jumping toward Cathera Prime. Not just individual vessels anymore, but entire fleets, as governments that had remained neutral suddenly found themselves facing populations that demanded action. Ambassador Zara stood in the main shelter beneath Cathera Prime's capital city, watching the battle reports with tears streaming down her silver cheeks. Around her, thousands of her people waited to learn whether their world would survive or become another footnote in the Dominion's campaign of conquest. "Ambassador," said Commander Rivera, who had remained on the planet to coordinate the evacuation efforts, "I'm getting reports from across the galaxy. It's unprecedented. Nearly 100 species have now sent ships to help. The Dominion fleet is completely outnumbered." Zara shook her head in amazement. "When we first called for help, we thought we were asking for military assistance. But humanity has given us something much more powerful." "What's that?" Rivera asked. "Hope," Zara replied. "You've shown the galaxy that it's possible to be better than we are, that we don't have to accept injustice just because opposing it is difficult." On the surface, the Dominion ground forces were beginning a full retreat. Faced with coordinated attacks from human marines, Catherian resistance fighters, and newly arrived troops from a dozen allied species, the occupying army had lost all strategic advantage. The planet was being liberated, one city at a time. The Dominion's last stand. High Admiral Vex, Supreme Commander of the Dominion fleet, stood on the bridge of his command ship, watching his empire's carefully planned conquest dissolve into chaos. For 3 centuries, the Dominion had expanded through the galaxy using a simple strategy: overwhelming force applied against isolated targets while other species looked the other way. Now, for the first time in Dominion history, they faced united opposition. Ships from over 100 different species filled space around Cathera Prime, all of them fighting with the desperate courage of those who had finally decided to stand up to a bully. "High Admiral," reported his tactical officer, "we've lost 60% of our fleet. The remaining ships are requesting permission to withdraw." Vex stared at the tactical display, watching red dots disappear one by one as his ships were destroyed or driven off. The humans had done something impossible. They had united the galaxy against him. "Sir," his communications officer called out, "we're receiving a transmission from the human fleet. They're offering us terms of surrender." Vex almost laughed. 6 months ago, humanity had been insignificant, barely worth acknowledging. Now they were dictating terms to the most powerful empire in the galaxy. "Put them through," he ordered. Captain Sarah Chen appeared on the main screen, her image broadcast from the bridge of the Defiance. Behind her, Vex could see officers from several different species working together with smooth efficiency. "High Admiral Vex," Sarah said, her voice calm but firm, "this is Captain Chen of the Earth vessel Defiance. On behalf of the Allied fleet, I'm offering you one chance to surrender. Lay down your weapons, release all prisoners, and withdraw from Catherian space. In return, your surviving ships will be allowed to leave safely." Vex studied the human captain's face. There was no hatred there, no desire for revenge, just a quiet determination to see justice done. "Captain Chen," Vex replied, "why should I trust the mercy of primitives like you?" Sarah's expression didn't change. "Because, High Admiral, that's what separates us from you. We fight to protect life, not to destroy it, even yours." Around the bridge of Vex's command ship, his officers looked at each other uncertainly. For years, they had followed orders without question, believing that might made right. But now, faced with an enemy who offered mercy instead of vengeance, many of them began to question everything they had been taught. High Admiral, his second-in-command, said quietly, "Perhaps we should consider." Silence. Vex roared, but even as he spoke, he could see the doubt in his officer's eyes. The Dominion's greatest strength had always been the absolute loyalty of its forces. Now that loyalty was crumbling. The new dawn. The formal surrender of the Dominion fleet took place in orbit around Cathara Prime, with representatives from over 50 species present to witness the end of the galaxy's greatest threat to peace. High Admiral Vex, his dark armor stripped of its insignia of rank, stood before the assembled delegates as terms were read. Ambassador Zara, speaking for her rescued people, delivered the statement that would be remembered for generations. Today marks not just the liberation of Cathara Prime, but the birth of a new era. An era where the strong protect the weak, where different species stand together against injustice, and where courage matters more than conquest. Captain Sarah Chan found herself reluctantly thrust into the role of spokesperson for the new alliance. Standing before the assembled representatives, she tried to explain what humanity had hoped to accomplish. "We didn't come here to start a war," she said. "We came here to prevent a genocide. What we discovered is that the galaxy is full of good people who were simply waiting for someone to make the first move. Today, we've all learned that we're stronger together than we ever were apart." The formation of the Galactic Defense Alliance was formalized in a ceremony broadcast across known space. Unlike the old Galactic Council, which had been dominated by the most powerful species, the new alliance was based on the principle that every civilization, no matter how small, had an equal voice in decisions affecting galactic peace. Dr. Elena Vasquez, now serving as the Alliance's first chief scientist, worked with researchers from dozens of species to share technology and knowledge freely. The advances in medicine, engineering, and physics that resulted from this cooperation would benefit every member world. The memorial. 1 year after the battle, a memorial was erected on Cathara Prime honoring all those who had died defending the planet. At its center stood a statue of Lieutenant James Park, but the memorial itself listed the names of everyone who had given their lives in the cause of freedom, regardless of species. Ambassador Zara, now serving as the first president of the Galactic Defense Alliance, spoke at the dedication ceremony. "This memorial reminds us that the price of freedom is always paid by those willing to sacrifice everything for others. Lieutenant Park and all those who died here didn't just save Cathara Prime. They saved the soul of the galaxy." Captain Sarah Chan, recently promoted to admiral and placed in command of the Alliance's combined fleet, laid a wreath at the base of the memorial. Around her stood officers from dozens of different species, all of them united by their shared commitment to protecting the innocent. Commander Marcus Rivera, now in charge of the Alliance's humanitarian operations, supervised the ongoing reconstruction efforts. Human engineers worked alongside Catharian architects, while medical teams from a dozen species helped heal the wounded. The scars of war were slowly being replaced by symbols of cooperation and hope. The legacy. 5 years later, the galaxy was a fundamentally different place. The Galactic Defense Alliance had grown to include over 200 species, from the smallest trading cooperatives to the largest stellar empires. Wars of conquest had become virtually extinct, replaced by diplomatic solutions and cooperative development projects. The old Dominion territories had been transformed into the new territories, a region where former enemies worked together to build a better future. Many former Dominion soldiers had joined the Alliance fleet, their skills redirected from conquest to protection. On Earth, children learned about the Battle of Cathara Prime in their history classes. The story of how humanity had chosen to stand up for strangers became a defining moment in human culture, a reminder of what they were capable of when they acted according to their highest ideals. But perhaps the most important change was invisible to most observers. Throughout the galaxy, on thousands of worlds belonging to hundreds of different species, beings had learned something fundamental about themselves and each other. That the courage to do what was right was not the exclusive property of any one species, but a quality that could be found anywhere life existed. The galaxy had learned to stand together, and in doing so, had become something greater than the sum of its parts. The age of expansion through conquest was over. The age of growth through cooperation had begun. And it all started because one small, young species had heard a cry for help and decided that turning away was not an option. In answering that call, humanity had not just saved the Catharians, they had saved the galaxy's capacity for hope. The memorial on Kethara Prime bore a simple inscription in the languages of every Alliance member. They called for help, and we answered. In that answer, we found ourselves. The end.